With the announcement of a free Dr. Ratio next patch in Honkai Star Rail, I'm sure that everyone is wondering, who can I use Dr. Ratio with? This video will be going over his compatibility with every single character. I will not be covering teams, I will only be covering his usage and compatibility with certain characters. Before we start, I just want to say, without spoiling his kit, Dr. Ratio will want you to probably have around 3 to 4 debuffs on enemies. Now, a debuff is a dot or a negative stat reducer. For example, Silverwolf can reduce the stats of enemies, but Kafka can apply dots on enemies. Now, something important to note is that not only characters have to apply debuffs. If you want to use something like a light cone that can apply a negative effect to an enemy, this counts as a debuff for Dr. Ratio. So, that is just something to consider. There are a few light cones in the game that can apply debuffs to enemies to help out your ratio compatibility. But starting with Clara in Destruction, Clara does not have any direct compatibility with Dr. Ratio because Clara's counter hits and marks do not actually count for a debuff. They count as a mark, which does not count as a debuff, so it's unfortunate, but Clara cannot work with Dr. Ratio. Arlen has no debuffs or dots of any kind outside of breaking an enemy's weakness, but every single break effect on an enemy counts as a debuff, so Arlen has nothing special to work with Ratio. Hook can apply a burn to enemies, so although it is not optimal, you can use Hook if you want for her burn to work with Dr. Ratio. Blade, Jingliu, and Dan Heng do not have any direct compatibility with Ratio, but they are all good characters, so you can use them with them if you want. And on to hunt characters, and with probably the most fun character to run with Dr. Ratio is Topaz Numby, because of her ability to put a Proof of Debt on an enemy. A Proof of Debt not only counts as a debuff, so it counts for Dr. Ratio's bonus, but it also increases follow-up attack damage by 50% on that enemy if they are marked. Now, Dr. Ratio's entire purpose for wanting debuffed enemies is that he will have a higher chance to use his follow-up attack, which will most likely be his highest damage attack. So Topaz and Numby will be a really fun choice to run with Dr. Ratio if you have them. That is just something to consider. She's probably the most fun choice to run with him. Yanxing can... Okay. Before I go any further, I do just want to say, I do not know how to pronounce all the names of characters in this game, so I apologize if I butcher a name. But Yanxing has a freeze, so technically you can run him, but his freeze isn't that consistent, so that's just something to consider. Dan Heng has a slow, so you can run Dan Heng with him if you want to. Su Shang has nothing, and Sealy has nothing. As for Erudition, Himiko does have a burn, so you can consider using Himiko if you want to, just to help out with clearing more than one enemy since she is Erudition, and Dr. Ratio will be a hunt character. Argency has nothing, Herta has nothing, Serval does have a way to apply shock to an enemy consistently through her ultimate and her skill, so that is a viable option to run with Ratio to deal with lightning weakness. Xing Shui does not have any dot damage, but she is probably the best character in this game, so if you want to use her with him, then you should totally do that. She is the best character, clearly, totally. King Yuan, unfortunately, does not have any dots, but he is the king, so you could also use him if you want to. As for Harmony characters, there's only one Harmony character that can actually apply a debuff to an enemy, and that is Asta. Unfortunately, Hanya's skill does not apply a debuff, it is a mark, so it does not count for Dr. Ratio's passive. But every single Harmony character does work with Dr. Ratio, all of them are good, it just depends on what you want to do with him. And as for Ruan Mei, I do not believe that Ruan Mei has a debuff for enemies, but she will obviously be a good choice, because she is a Harmony character, and there is not a single bad Harmony character. Now, as for Nihility characters, all of them work with Dr. Ratio, given that all of them can apply around 1 to 2 debuff to enemies rather consistently, especially if you have Luke as Light Cone. Now, the one of note is Silverwolf, who can apply around 3 debuffs consistently with a single E, which means that if Dr. Ratio can apply 1 debuff to an enemy consistently, that is reaching the ideal 4 debuff mark that he wants to have. So, Silverwolf will probably be the best character to run with Dr. Ratio if you have her. But if you don't, then I'm sure Pela is a perfectly fine option, or any other Nihility character. As for Preservation, Traveler and, well, main MC and Fushuan do not have any way to apply a debuff to an enemy, I believe. But March and Japard can freeze enemies, Japard more consistently, March only in her ultimate. But that is something to consider if you want to try and use March or Japard. As for Abundance characters, all of them are perfectly fine to use. They cannot apply debuffs to enemies, I believe. I think Natasha can apply a weakness when she enters battle using her skill, but you're not going to be doing that often, probably. The most notable one is Locha, who can run the new Planner Relic set, because he is imaginary to buff Dr. Ratio's attack through that. I believe it is the Penacony set. Yeah. They are the same element type, so increase damage by 10% if you want to use Locha with him. But that is about it for Dr. Ratio. Now, if you do ask me what team I'm going to use Topaz with Silverwolf, and probably swap between Locha and Fushuan whenever I want. But a lot of characters can apply dots relatively nice, so Dr. Ratio will work with probably a lot of people on your account. So yeah, that's the end of that. Hope this helped. Bye-bye.